Welcome to God with George Ortega. This is episode number 98. I'm recording it on Tuesday, March 9th, 2021 at 1:03 p.m. Eastern Time. And I just attended a Torah class. Ordinarily, I talked yesterday about this development. God is apparently having me establish a routine in terms of how I prepare for this show. And so ordinarily, like I said yesterday, well, all right, I thought that I would just meditate 10-20 minutes before each episode, and then that would be my time for determining what to talk about to a great extent. And so I thought that I thought that rather than doing that this time, because in previous times I'd done this presentation after this Torah class and several others, and having discovered that was a very positive influence on what I said and how I said it, then I thought I would just segue immediately into this episode rather than taking the time to meditate. But all right, now we were talking about the Sabbath and work. So actually I'm gonna but I gotta relate it to God. All right, so yes, so God gave us the Sabbath to remind us that life is not about work. Life is not about this modern life to a great extent, getting more and more and having more and more accomplishments, more progress, more of whatever. Yes, these are all wonderful ways to create a better world, and we have, and work is wonderful for that. But like the Greeks understood, like we understand today, the purpose of our life is not work. Work is simply a tool, like everything else, for our happiness. That's why God created us. That's why we're here. And even though we know that, it's interesting. They've asked this question to people for decades, hundreds of thousands of subjects in these surveys. And they ask them, what do you want most out of life? And the number one answer is always happiness. What do you want most for your kids? The number one answer is always happiness. So basically, even though we should know that, we should have that in mind all the time, the Sabbath is intended to not just remind us, but to Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi, mentioned that the Sabbath is like a dress rehearsal for this world to come, for this era, time, whether it's on this earth or beyond, where we will exist in a Sabbath, a Sabbath that perhaps we don't have to work anymore. Perhaps our work will have been done. So, all right, but I feel like, I'm talking about the Sabbath, and that's great. That's about us. Let's bring God more into this. I will try to stay with the Sabbath for a bit more. The idea is that, as somebody in the class mentioned, it's, the Hebrew word work is a bit confusing relative to this question of what's work and not on the Sabbath. Somebody had mentioned that thinking is work, reading, learning Torah is work in a certain sense. So it's not really about not working on the Sabbath. It's like, I think it's to not work in ways related to our physical sustenance. And that excludes procreation, because it is a commandment to to procreate, to perpetuate our species, but in terms of our life, or our this lifetime, I think that that the quote unquote work we do on the Sabbath, has to be about holy work, work that's separate from the work that we ordinarily do to subsist, to survive. All right, so what else? So I hooked up that my interface to the computer, so now I can play, I can play bass guitar once in a while, but I still haven't like done a test on it, like in other words, like I don't know if it'll work because I'm recording now. I don't know if it'll work within a recording. So but that's I'm looking forward to that, because I'm looking forward to, like, after talking for a little while, just playing a little bass and then just riffing on the fact that this stuff is like just coming from who knows where, and if it's coming from who knows where, how can I say that I'm freely willing it, that I am willing it, and then who is this I that is willing it, so that's good. All right, God, we've got about 21 and a half minutes to talk about God. All right, I was about to say that, yeah, it feels like we're moving into a new era on this earth, because we have to, we can't afford to continue doing things the way we have been doing them, because they're counterproductive in a lot of ways, in some ways. So that's not really so much about God, except that God is apparently leading us to this. All right, let's, I was thinking, I had a thought, I really should know, I should, this, fine, I am positively influenced by these Torah classes, but segueing immediately into an episode after one is challenging. It's challenging, which is fine. I was going to say, all right, maybe I shouldn't, but the challenge is good. So now I'm going to wait until God has me determine and express what God wants me to say next. And so let's see. All right, all right. Generally, all right, this is cool. So, like, I meditate a lot, sometimes for hours. I meditated maybe half an hour earlier today. I'll probably meditate another at least hour or two later. I meditate a lot, sometimes 5-6 hours a day. And when I meditate, very productive thoughts distract me, interestingly, from the meditation, which is interestingly a benefit. One of the benefits of meditation is not just the rest and the peace, but it's kind of the rest and the peace allow a space for God to communicate to us, for more important, I would say, thoughts to come into our minds. And so, all right, so I just had this thought, God just planted this thought in my mind, because that's what happens, that's what God does, that I would just, I don't think I should close my eyes for some reason, but like that I should just like pause and wait for God to just tell me very directly what she wants me to talk about relative to her. So without further ado, let's do this. All right, the thought that's coming to mind is that so much of the ritual in religion, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, is about reminding us of God, that God exists. And once we're reminded, then it's inviting an interaction with God. God exists as, all right, and more directly, so like, I want to talk about God as being a consciousness. You know, some denominations, sects of certain religions, modern day religions, tend to view God as a process or as a, well, not a consciousness, laws of nature, whatever. And yes, God is that. God is, for example, the process of cause and effect. God is a process of evolution, of the entire universe. But God, I think most fundamentally, relative to how we understand reality through our consciousness, is that God is a consciousness. And so, yes, what that means is that I think in a very literal sense, very concrete sense, this reality is God's imagination. Well, I mean, yes, I'm hesitating because it's not just that it's God's imagination. Yes, it is. Like, basically, like, God conceives of this world and this world comes into being. God maintains God's conception of this world. This world continues to exist. But the one other kind of correlate, I think, to this would be that that God also has a body, so like, and so God is a part of God's creation, which is kind of like that. We could do a show on that. I mean, like, because that, that obviously, it's not accessible to our reason to because we're talking about eternity, when did God create God? But yeah, the point is that God is a consciousness. And I think the idea is that sometimes you hear people say that God doesn't have a body. God does have a body. Look around you. Everything is God's body. You're part of God's body. The 2 to 3 trillion galaxies in this known universe are parts of God's body. And so I think the point I want to make relative to that is that within God's body is God's consciousness. It's like God's consciousness is God's body made physically manifest. And that, I guess, it's a perfect analogy. Let's say you in your mind come up with, an idea for a poem, and then you set it to paper, and that poem is no longer just an imagination. It has a physical reality. Or perhaps a work of art is more a better analogy, because you can create a sculpture. It has this physical existence that again expresses consciousness. So yeah, let's try to stay with this this contemplation on God's consciousness, on God being consciousness. I think one of the benefits of seeing God in this way is that it invites greater interaction with us. If we just see God, for example, as having been the creator, and she just, like, at a certain point, maybe, gets involved in our lives, helping us out in one way or another, but generally remains distant, you know, then that I think separates us from God. It's a way of viewing God that that doesn't appreciate that that God is everything, that God is moment by moment through every moment of our lives. Excuse me. Not just assisting us and communicating with us, but being. I mean, we are God, you know, moment by moment by moment. God is like expressing herself completely through us, through everything, every moment. And again, like, got a little distracted. The idea is that to the extent we have that perspective, we're going to seek God out more. And like, so I think I want to describe God as not just consciousness, but consciousness that's deeply connected to virtue. It's not just that God is conscious, and so we talk to God because God hears us and God communicates with us. But it's for the purpose, the value of God to us is God's goodness. You know, and again, goodness is the word we use to define what creates happiness. So God is our source, not just of life, of happiness. And so it's not, you know, just that God is conscious. God is this benevolent being. Now, again, when I say that, I have to pause a bit because, like, you know, what we view as not benevolent also comes from God, and we've got to like tease that out. We've got to like, you know, continue to come back to that to understand that better. But the reason for thinking about God, for praying to God, for conceptualizing God, for understanding God better and better, I believe may be to get better and better at understanding the difference between right and wrong, the difference between goodness and badness, the difference between what will serve us individually and those we love and the world and the future, and what punishes us, what causes us to suffer. And so we, you know, we can rely on science and reason and philosophy and logic for this to a certain extent, but I think that's the value of the Torah. Like, for example, yeah, logic perhaps could have gotten us to the point where, like, we understand that every 7 days it's wise to rest, to have our body rest, so we can just, you know, work better those other 6 days. But to have been told that, you know, as God told us that, is a blessing. All right, so now I just lost my train of thought. Got about 9 minutes left. So, but yeah, no, the basic point is that by thinking about God, which rituals invite, you know, the more blessings we say each day, the more we're going to be thinking about God. The more, you know, we study Torah, we pray. And so, like, the value again is I think to the extent we maintain an active, constant contact with God, we make better moral decisions. We understand morality more. You know, it's like God is kind of like this supercharger to our conscience, and as long as we're tapped into God, you know, when we're making moral decisions, then we can be assured that they will be more accurate. That we'll get it right. We won't, think we're doing right when we're doing wrong, or vice versa. So, I think that's a very important aspect of our relationship to God, of why it's important to understand that God exists, and why it's especially important to understand that God by necessity exists. That it's not just that God exists in our belief system or in our minds, it's just so much more than that. So, and I have to come to this show, just think about this again, 98 episodes. And each time I, slowly perhaps, but certainly, I feel that I'm coming to understand God better as I share my understanding. And I think that, there's levels of God's reality to us. The first level being, for example, to be told that God exists. All right. And with that level, well, we're told that God exists, but we're a bit skeptical, is it true? Then the next level is to understand that God by necessity exists, have this cognitive understanding of who God is. And if we define God as we define God, God must necessarily, by logic and reason, exist. But that's a cognitive kind of a conceptual understanding. Yes, God exists, but a higher level than that is to enliven that understanding, to have that understanding stay with us, within our conscious, to focus on that understanding throughout our days, so that God, manifests herself as not just this concept, not just this belief, but an active part of our lives. And certainly we should think of God as the essential part of our lives. Certainly, yes, we have, we have other people in our lives, and we have ourselves, and we have to be considerate and understanding and helpful to ourselves and each other, because we're sentient. We feel pleasure and pain, and we need to tend to ourselves. God, I don't think, needs that from us. I don't think God, is going to suffer if we do or don't do something, but we will. So yes, we, other people and we are central to our lives, but so how do we actually bring that together? So, God is God more central? Is God more central? That I think, yes, God is more central than other people, because without an understanding of God, we're limited in how we can empathize with and help other people and ourselves. God, again, being, as her highest expression, goodness, is what allows us to be good to each other. This because I think, when we understand God, and I guess maybe what I'm saying now, maybe that before we had this idea, this understanding, this Abrahamic understanding of God, this introduction to God, I think we had a non-conceptual understanding of God. Like it was like, for example, there's that saying that, you know, like a fish is so immersed in water, that's all it knows, so it doesn't really, you know, distinguish it, you know. So it's just that God, even before, you know, again, God was introduced to us by Abraham, we had that conception of God. It just wasn't as clear, and it wasn't certainly linguistic, but you know, the sense of God as the controller, as the being that makes things happen. I think that's, you know, that's what animism actually is about. You know, that God is animated in everything. Everything is quote unquote alive. Everything is God. So so that's interesting. All right, we've got about a minute and a half left, and I've made it through another episode. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't sleep that much last night. I mean, like God had me sleep like 5 hours, which is I'm thinking what to do. I want to head out later, but you know, not just yet. So I think I am going to take a nap. I'm going to meditate first because I love to meditate. And I'm starting a new diet. I'm starting this Maimonides diet. Basically, he was like the top physician, I think, in the Middle Ages, Jewish, also like, you know, a top Jewish rabbi. And he had a habit of eating just once a day. So I've just started that, like, you know, I'm experimenting, like eating late at night, having kind of like a feast, you just have like all my calories at one time. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting. So like, you know, so I'm not thinking about food for the rest of the day. I'll maybe like eat at 8 or 9 o'clock tonight. I don't know. Anyway, so hope you're having a good day. Catch this every Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock on White Plains Community Media, channel 76 if you get Optimum, 45 if you get Verizon. And the episodes are on YouTube also. And starting with the 100th episode, I'm going to like upload each episode, not just to YouTube, but also to Facebook, you know. So anyway, I'm out of time. See you next time, God willing.